As already stated, my name is Eboni Turman, and my forthcoming book, which will be out in about 2 weeks, is entitled Toward a Womanist Ethic of Incarnation, Black Bodies, the Black Church, and the Council of Chalcedon. The book essentially posits that the body is a theological problem, and it makes this assertion in terms of how the body functions in Black churches in terms of gender discrimination. So why Black women's bodies especially are understood to be problematic in the Black church tradition when it comes to preaching Afro-misogyny, when it comes to preventing Black women from participating in religious leadership at the highest levels, when it comes to Black women themselves embracing the role of patriarch and misogynist, as well as other things. So I trace this problem back to the early church, and I look to the conciliar tradition, particularly the Council of Chalcedon, to suggest that the body has always been a problem for Christendom, that this is not a new thing, that the very body of Jesus was highly contested in the ancient world as it was seen through logos sarx theology that emerges from Alexandria and logos anthropos theology that emerges from Antioch, that Jesus' body was understood as not normative by the arbiters of power insofar as it was divine and human. How could this body that was both and, right, actually be, right? How could this be true, that God was both divine and human? And so Jesus' body was actually contested because it did not fit the vision of what embodiment should be in terms of the arbiters of power. So I look at Chalcedon to, again, show how the non-normative body is a problem that begins with Jesus. And in order for the church to transgress, right, the oppression, the gender discrimination that currently fragments our churches, it's going to have to understand Jesus differently and understand that the differentiated body, the body that is non-normative, is actually the redemptive site for the church. So I trace this problem theologically, of course, with the Council of Chalcedon, and then I move to a social ethical genealogy of the body problem, or the problem of body, as it has played out specifically for Black people in America. And I use a Du Boisian lens because, of course, it was Du Bois who said very classically, how does it feel to be a problem, speaking of the Black body in America. So I look at how, again, the problem functions theologically, how the problem of body functions ethically within the context of America, and then I seek to pick up the religious trajectory, or the religious tradition that sought to deal with bodies, which was the social gospel. The social gospel is really the first site, the first religious trajectory that turns its attention to what James Cone would say, saving bodies rather than just saving souls. And so I seek to, or rather I say that even though this is the confession of the social gospel, that the social gospel seeks to save bodies, that it actually is not as social as it confesses itself to be. That it has promulgated the problem of body that's first emerging in the Chalcedonian definition without even knowing it, right? And this problem, as it's articulated in the social gospel tradition, has found its way in a very paradoxical form, in a very insidious way, into Black churches, particularly because Black churches that are social gospel driven, again being born at the interstices of abolition and enslavement, profess justice as its aim. And yet it has embraced this problem of body as it's been promulgated by the social gospel tradition, even though it claims, right, to save bodies. The book looks at the social gospel-driven churches as they have been formed by one of the primary African-American progenitors of the social gospel, Benjamin E. Mays. and Benjamin May's role as the premier educator of black men in the early to mid 20th century, and how within the context of his educational trajectory at Morehouse College, he helped to form some of the leading moral managers of subaltern sacred spaces, or the black church. Moral managers who, under Benjamin E. May's, minds and hearts were trained toward the end of justice making for black people. And yet, this justice making for black people has always been haunted by a gender issue that begins, right, with Christendom itself, right? It's just a part of who we are, that different bodies, whether they are female, whether they are gay, lesbian, whether they are trans, whether they are young, whether they are old, bodies that defy normativity are problems. And that is something that has been coded into black churches. So ultimately, this discussion leads into a constructive edge, which suggests that thinking about Jesus and how we understand Jesus and who we understand Jesus to be will help us to grow past this side of fragmentation in our church. That because Jesus, I argue, is the primary symbol of Afro-Christian religion, it's not the cross, per James Cone, it is Jesus. We must look to Jesus. We must understand the body of Jesus differently in order to begin thinking differently about how our bodies as male and female coexist together in ways that engender justice and hope in our churches. And until we do that, then as contemporary conversations have posited, the black church will die. This book is important because, as I said, in a time where black churches and the importance, the significance of black churches is at stake, is questioned, not only in our backroom conversations, but in the New York Times, right? Is the black church dead? The Huffington Post. In times like these, where the black church is under attack, as we've heard today in the media and elsewhere, it turns to the black church and speaks a word of hope about the redemptive possibilities of the black church if we can only understand our ultimate symbol in a different way. It also is critical because it looks to black women as the redemptive possibility for black churches. If black churches can engage black women differently and recognize black women as central to the functioning of the body, and thus as indispensable parts of the whole, then there will again be a better life chance for the church. And finally, the book speaks to black communal wholeness. This book is about strengthening the black community. It is about engaging or thinking how men and women who love God and who love the church can be together in ways that do not foster animosity, but really honor God insofar as together they are able to build justice and create hope for the future. So,
what role do you think women play in their redemption? So when we look at sort of the numbers within black church, and 70–80% black women, what role do you think that they play in demanding more justice or equity in church?
Absolutely. So this counter-socialization or revolutionary spirit that in my second book I liken to a Marxist proletarian revolt, right, begins with this sociological framing of black women as actually 90% of black church membership, black church congregations. And the idea that black male preachers profit in disproportionate ways from the labor, the volunteer labor most often, of black women, that is also tied into their actual labor, right, that produces profit through tithes and offerings for the preacher's benefit. And so the revolution, just in terms of a kind of Marxist lens, will absolutely begin with Black women, but should also include their allies. One of the first steps that women will have to take, again, it will require moral education and counter-socialization, but really is putting down, taking off, it will be a kenotic act in terms of theological language, taking off the lie that has been told to them about themselves, right? So most often, or often you will hear women say, I don't want a woman pastor, or, you know, women should not preach, right? But this is something that women have learned over years and years and years of being conditioned to believe that men are, you know, are better, that men are superior, that there are certain things that men should do and women should not do in the service of the church. And so it will require women themselves reassessing their humanity, which is why this book is important, because it situates Black women in relationship to Jesus, almost positing, and really positing that Jesus is a Black woman, or is consubstantial, homoousios with Black women as to their humanity. And so it will take Black women recognizing the God in themselves, right, and to rise up against the lie, to rise up and take off the lie that has been told to them about their inferiority historically within Black church denominational churches.
Thank you very much.